Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Kenosha Public Library program, Finding the History in Your Home, How to Find History in a Community of Buildings. It is one of many events in our November Adult Events handout, including programs in the History and Mystery series. I'm Patty Bajabier, an Adult and Digital Services Librarian with our library system. We at the Kenosha Public Library are pleased and honored to welcome the return of Cynthia Nelson as a presenter. Ms. Nelson is the Curator Archivist for the Kenosha County Historical Society. The Society's museum is the Kenosha History Center. She works with other professionals to fulfill its mission to collect and preserve Kenosha County's history through education, programs, and exhibits. The campus is a center for research and learning, and the institution is a respected authority on our county's past. We have been granted permission to record this presentation and post it to the Kenosha Public Library's YouTube channel within the week for a limited period. So if you wish to experience it again, or inform others who have been unable to join us, do so in a timely manner. The Kenosha History Center has previously partnered with the Kenosha Public Library, working with the University of Wisconsin Digital Collections Center to digitize historical images and other materials from local collections and make them accessible on the internet. Links to these resources are found on the websites of the Kenosha History Center and the Kenosha Public Library. These special collections, titled Kenosha County History, Images and Texts, 1830s to 1940s, and Kenosha's Lost Industries, Photographs and Corporate Materials, 1850s to 1990s. These collections also contain images of the homes of prominent Kenoshans, use the keyword residence or the topic phrase homes and buildings to view them within UW's larger State of Wisconsin collection. Now I turn the program over to Cindy.
Thank you, Patty. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be your expert, I guess, tonight. What we're going to talk about are the resources that if you wish to research your home or a building. Now, we have a huge amount of requests for such purposes. For a matter of fact, two of the gentlemen who are the physical audience, we know that they do this regularly because they're looking always for family genealogy, but also their community ties regarding business places, the questions they get asked because they are actually docents. And do both of you do our historic walk too? And they both do the historic walk that we do at Library Park in our community. So we actually have building experts in the room tonight, but I'm going to tell you about how we go about it. So our program tonight is Finding the History in Your Home, How to Find History in a Community of Buildings. I'm going to go talk beyond homes though tonight because really people want to know both. They want to know about their homes. They want to know about places that their family have worked, companies that they worked at, grocery stores, family bakeries, all those different things that make a community's history. So it doesn't have to be a home. Homes are actually the hardest thing to research because people come and say, I want to know about my house. And the thing is your house is beyond your brick and mortar, your siding or your wood. Your house are the people who designed it, the people who had to finance it, people who had to build it, and then the generations of people who lived in that home afterwards. So researching a home or a resident or a building is actually that whole culture that comes around just what I call bricks and mortars sort of facility. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my next slide. Just tells you who I am in print. What are the two most frequently asked questions? I want to know about my family's history. I want to know more about my house or building. These two photographs here have come from our digitized collections. So the collections that Patty was speaking of tonight, it's going to be in either of those. This is Sophia Swede. He is a settler, goes back to settlement times. I definitely have records of him. I think this photograph is 1840s, maybe into the 1850s. It was a daguerreotype, and it's actually those cased glass pictures that have usually two people in them, not always. And it's a husband and a wife photograph. We just put him up here. And this is a house called the Weed House. However, it's Justin Weed's house. Now, Justin, we haven't completed the genealogy on him, but it's definitely of the Weed family. I'm not sure if it's a son, but I looked in the census, and actually in Sophia's list of people who are living in his household, there is a Justin. And he has an incredibly huge household. So I don't know if he has brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, how his extended family is, but it's a huge amount of people who are living in this household. But this is a house that is on Washington Road, and you probably have seen it. And this will come up later in the talk. Just an aerial photo of the community. This is looking northeast out to the harbor. And if you look at it, you'll see most of this will look like commercial buildings. It's going to be your downtown business area. It's going to be factories. The big building with the multiple windows is actually the corporate headquarters that was originally Northwestern Wire Mattress Company, which was Simmons Mattress, as most people would know it. It later became AMC. But when we go further on, you're going to see that this complex isn't nearly as huge. One thing to point out when it comes to photographs, they can tell you so many things. They can tell you about streets. They can tell you, like this one, shows you the harbor, shows you the lighthouses, actually, the Cream City Brick lighthouses in that upper left-hand corner. If you look at the left-hand side, or my right-hand side over here, it looks like there's a pond, and that's where the stadium used to be, the football stadium downtown. So you can date things when it comes to photographs by, well, modern times, automobiles, but also how your landscape changes in maps. And maps are very, very important to doing history about buildings and communities. So I have quite a few. We have thousands of photographs in the collections that are digitized. So it's an opportunity for you to see the community, but also look at residences and buildings in the community. What is interesting about this is some buildings that are connected to Bain Wagon are still around in this photograph, but what Bain Wagon, disappears. It's sold. The buildings are destroyed. I know they had also a fire at one time, but we'll be able to see some other photos with this. But in here, there were a sprinkling of residences, and in the 1850s, there isn't much beyond Sheridan Road or beyond the railroad track that runs through town by the courthouse. So what you'll see over time is residences disappear out of your business districts, and they get replaced with commercial buildings. It could be just a regular two-story building, what would be like, a floral shop that's only so wide and so deep. And then you'll have bigger buildings that get replaced over time, those residences, which could be like, we had our department stores, like we had Block Brothers, and we had Barden's in town, and we had Penny's, and we had Montgomery Ward. So those buildings replaced those residences over time. But also what happened is this community lost a lot of their residences in what is now our business district, because we had something called the Pettit Malt House, multi-story building. They dried and barley for brewing industry. And it had multiple fires, and there were houses right next to this building. We had fires also downtown when we had frame buildings. And what they did is the city finally instituted ordinances where you could not have a frame house building in the downtown anymore. You would have had to have brick or mortar buildings, iron beams and such. So the dynamics of a community, when you get bigger businesses in your community grows and grows, you lose your residences that might have been your central core of what were your buildings, your houses in your community. One of the oldest houses actually that still exists, or most of the oldest houses that still exist in the community, are on the north side beyond the city hall, in that neighborhood that would be where St. Catherine's High School St. Catherine's Hospital used to be, south of the band shell going towards 50th, for a matter of fact. Those are some of the oldest houses in the community. But if you come down 7th into 6th, there's one little house right before you get to the hotel. It's a very, very old house. I wanted to do that for my research for tonight, but I chose not to. But so think about how a community just changes over time. I remember when 22nd Avenue was kind of like the end of town. And then when people started building like the Lance Edition, and this is for people who are familiar with the community, when you get out to 39th was in the middle of the country. And I remember them building the Piggly Wiggly out there going, what are they building out here for? It's the middle of farm fields. And now look how far our city limits actually extend all the way out to 94. So owners also find it fascinating to learn about their homes or their business properties, and the information is designed to guide you through your research today. This is only a touch of the material that we could do. My question would be, why did I pick this image? This is Mrs. Kavanagh, and we don't know if it's her children, but it's said with her family. This photograph is in the Lewis Tears collection, which is one of the digitized collections. And the range for this is 1889 to 1914. Kavanaghs are in town. And if you could see, there's a little sign in the window. It says rent. She's renting rooms out. But she's not listed in the city directory having a boarding house. Now, I don't know what Mrs. Kavanagh's first name is. And I was not able to find Mrs. Kavanagh in the city, in our census. There's a James Kavanagh who ends up being a banker. There's some other Kavanaghs that are all interrelated. I don't know if she's an earlier generation of the Kavanaghs who've become quite successful within the community, because I'm having a hard time figuring out what her name is. And I'm struggling with this. So why I picked this image is I want to know who she is. I want to know about her building, and because she has a renting a room sign in her window and these children with her. But I wasn't able to find something beyond this at this point. So let's start with some basic questions. What questions do we need to ask? This is a close-up, so you can see why I'm very fascinated with her. She's very tan on her face, and then she has this very light skin on the top of her forehead. So she's definitely out in the sun and getting it. So she's doing something with labor that she's out in the sunshine. And then we have a little girl here whose hair is cut very, very short, which would have been unusual for the time period for this photograph. So I just want to know about them. I want to know about them. I want to know about their house. I haven't found it yet. So what is the story? What is the story behind your house? And it's connected to the people who live there. Whose house or building is this? We have an identifier. The Kavanaghs live there. Do the Kavanaghs rent this house? Do the Kavanaghs own this house? I don't know yet. Where was this building? In this time period from 1889 to 1914, we know the community is not enormous yet. So I'm thinking she's probably Well, we know she's definitely north of 75th Street because 75th Street isn't around in the same capacity we have now. She's not going to go probably beyond the river if she's in town. And if you looked at the first photo, it looks like the lake might be behind her, behind the house. There's actually even an outhouse in her backyard in the original photograph. And I'm thinking if it's 1914, she's not beyond 22nd Avenue if her home is in the community. When was it built? Don't know yet, but we have a range of a photograph. And we know that it's existing during that time period. Could be older than 1889. When was it built? I don't have a date. I don't know when it was built yet. This is when you go to see if you can find old property tax roll records. But the thing is, we don't know the location of the house. So what's going to tell me about things is, instead of looking at maps and things right away, or you know your family's name, you know who you bought your house from, you might be able to find out who they bought their house from. And you can find that in tax records and records at the county level, and what people would call the old Union building. So the other administrative building next to the courthouse. You might be able to find out when it was built from there by looking for Kavanagh in their records. They don't like it when you just come with a name though. So we want to find some other clues to get there. Who built it? Who is the owner? Frame house for the style this is. It's very traditional. We go back. It's a very traditional wood frame house. It would be maybe even a very, very simple Victorian because of the turned spindles and the detail there. But you can see, you know, she's got leaks on her porch, so it's not the best maintained house. And if you can see in the back, they don't have indoor plumbing because they have an outhouse in the back. So those are some clues that will tell us things about homes, about the families, about time periods. Questions we can't answer. Where did the family work? But we hope she's getting income from renting rooms. What was happening in the community? I have a time range from 1889 to 1914. There's all sorts of research you can do about what's happening in the community. Are there any photographs? I've showed you a photograph, so we know we have a photograph. I do have other photographs of Kavanagh. I do have a folder in the collections, in our photographic collections, that I pulled out. It's Kavanagh's. It's not them though. This is only in the Lewis Tears collections. She is not in the family folder of the rest of the Kavanaghs. The rest of the Kavanaghs are all fancy. You know, you could tell they were that family at that point. If it's the same family, we're doing quite well because they are formal portraits with the men in the suits and the women all dressed up. And last thing is the building still there. Could be refaced, could have different columns, could have had the porch ripped off. Don't know enough about it though. This is a perfect example of somebody starting with the building and you may know nothing about it. We at least have a photograph. That's more than a lot of people have. And in particular, contemporary homes, a lot of people go, I want to know something about my house because they're thinking my house is from the 40s and the house is from the 50s. Oh, my house is really old. But for me, that's really in contemporary times. And a lot of times those houses aren't recorded because think about how you get a photograph of a house. We used to go all sit on the porch and it'd be somebody's birthday or it might be a holiday, 4th of July, we all sit on the front porch and you get a picture of all you jammed together. You don't get the whole house. And in many places you couldn't get really far across the street and get your whole house in. So the thing about photographs is this is one stage further than a lot of people are starting with. Some of the things owners and researchers typically want to know beyond what I had said. Approximate date of construction. A lot of times architectural styles will tell you something. And what we'll do is we'll talk about doing just exterior walk around of your building and interior walking around. People want to know the first owner, their occupation. I'm using his because in the early times, the man's name is usually on the lease. Depending on where you are in the country, women were not allowed to own property. So if we're going back in time, you may have to be looking for a record of a male. The building's original use, is it a home? Was it an apartment? Is it a retrofitted building that may have been an old school? A lot of people you'll see out in the counties have been saving rural school buildings and turning them into their homes. It could be a building that is going to get retrofitted. I heard a rumor that the old tannery building that is on Sheridan Road, across from like Lou Perini's parking lot, maybe retrofitted into some kind of apartment complex or condos and that. So you'll see that happening in communities. So what was the building originally? For me, a perfect example of one where I live is Mitchell Wagons, which was connected to Kenosha, had a wagons works that we end up, Bain family end up owning the Mitchell Wagon Works. That has been retrofitted into apartments, but also specifically for artists and residents, people who are artists, and they have all sorts of studio space accessible for them in that apartment complex, which is the old Wagon Works. But I know it as being a storage place for Jacobson Manufacturing's lawnmower stuff and tractor stuff and all that. And that was a building that was scheduled to actually be torn down, and it's been retrofitted. So the thing is what was your building originally? Was it a home? Was it something else? Chronological list of owners and occupants. People want to know their occupations and biographical notes. So that involves a lot of research just beyond your house, but that's where people are usually headed for their buildings, where they want to go. Changes in the use of the physical state of the buildings and grounds. I just mentioned that with Mitchell, also with the old tannery building and how things change. Think about, there's now a microbrewery in, is it the Barden's building or the Penny's building? Barden's building. So think about that building had a lot of, had to have a lot of restoration, but it's been retrofitted into something new. So, and it's very expensive to save a building and retrofit it. So many times people rip those buildings down because it's cheaper to build new than to retrofit buildings. And usually when you retrofit buildings, you need all new utilities. So to know about, as I mean, electrical, many times new roofs, new HVAC systems and things of that sort. So a lot of people, you know, it's costs you money to retrofit a building, let alone retrofitting a home. How many people bought a home that's a fixer upper and said, oh, we'll fix it up. But there's a lot of capital besides finesse to know how to do the work. Names of architects and contractors and information about them. That is very hard in our community to find. You have to be able to find building permits or records of that, old blueprints. I often get asked, do we have blueprints? We don't have a lot of blueprints in our collections of homes. So that is hard, but in some communities, it's not so hard because they were collected, or an architect or a builder in the area actually just had what we call the morgue or blueprints, and a local historical society has been lucky enough to get their morgue or blueprints. Events and importance connected to a structure. Well, the Manor House, or what was called the Manor House on 3rd Avenue, would be important. It was a bed and breakfast. They did events, they did weddings there, but that was owned by the Nash family of Nash Automobile. So that is a house that has significant importance because it was a Nash mansion, but also it was retrofitted into something. And now I believe it's a private residence again. So it's interesting how buildings and houses can go through cycles. And let's see, the building's relationship to the neighborhood and the community. A good example is the Anderson subdivision, the Anderson development. Younger people think the Anderson development is Anderson Pool. And older people know it's the property where St. Joseph's High School was built. So the thing when people are doing research is they have to realize that there's a modern context and memory, and then there may be the next generation's context and memory, and then it gets leaner for information unless you do your digging. So that we have actually a survey, I think it's from 1926 in the collection, and we don't use it often, but it's a great resource because it's a survey of 1926. There was a housing shortage in the community. There was a building associations started. So they started building buildings. They started financing buildings through an organization. And then the Depression hit. And then there was no building being done. And we already in the community had building shortages because we had people who were living in basements, people who, lots of families were co-living together. So it was a tight in the community. But that survey is showing you where these planned developments were, where they were going to be building these new homes for people. And then it stopped. But it's interesting because there's notes on it and it talks about developments and Bonds Estate or Bonds Woods is in there. And that is actually the modern Lincoln Park. So that's in the survey. And why things get developed. Why didn't Lincoln Park, why didn't Bonds Woods become a subdivision? I can tell you because Lincoln Park was a swamp at one time. And they had problems with the mosquitoes and that. So no homes were ever developed there. But around the adjacent part of the community, that part of that was already developed. And with the brass having moved into that, the brass companies, casting companies, then workers needed housing near there. Now you'll find in communities that you'll have, developments, the same builder will come in and build a bunch of houses. They may be two different plans. They might be all the same houses. They just have different finishes, as we would call them, on the insides or the outsides, but they're still the same foot plan. There's a type of research for architectural documentation for conservation, restoration, and historic landmark registration. This is done by architectural historians, archaeologists, historians, building engineers, urban planners, and others. It's extremely detailed on-site inspections and detailed documentation for historic sources, from historic sources. So that means these are those folks who are retrofitting these buildings, who will come and ask an organization or people who previously owned a building, we need to know everything that you can tell me about it. We want blueprints, we want this, we want that and that. And sometimes you can pull a blueprint out for somebody who's doing a restoration. It could be for a historic house, or it could be for a historic commercial building or an industrial building. But this is done at the professional level. And this is where you get grants or assistance or low cost loans. And is the incentive that our community has to have people come in and retrofit buildings. But this is like as detailed you can get. Now, some people, who do family genealogy, they're looking for that kind of detail in their homes or their buildings or the houses that their family lived in the past. But with expansion in our community, we've discovered buildings disappear. Just to give you an idea, this is Marketplace. This is 56th and 6th Avenue. It was Market Street, Market Square, and Main Street at one time. Buildings that are still there is this one between the power lines. I still call it Mayor Drug. It's had a bunch of different businesses, and that building really hasn't changed. It's the one that has the Rexall sign on it yet. The building across the street from it was First National Bank. It's been Marine Bank. It's been Chase Bank, and it's not a bank any longer. So just show you how things change. We don't have paved streets at this time, at least in the square here. This is where farmers came for market day, came in from the county to get whatever goods they needed, do their banking, come and sell whatever produce and other goods that they have to the community. But you will see there's trolleys here, so it's modern times, but you also see horse and carriages, horse and wagons here. We see a wagon here, which I'm not sure what it's full of, what it's carrying. There's horses over here. So this is the change of the community when it's after 1900, because we have telegraph poles, we have electricity coming into the community. And this building with the awning doesn't exist anymore. That building is gone. That's near Why Not now. It's that vacant spot there because the street is wider. There's also old Rhodey Opera House in there. So that gives you a time date that we can figure out with that. And next to that is the Fisher Hotel. So it gives you a context of time, since we're not really talking about photographs, but it gives you an idea how you can figure out dates for your buildings and what your buildings look like. One photograph is, I'm not a local, it's the Krogh, Krogh, tailor shop. The family sent us three photographs of the family, one inside, like 3 outside, and they were kind enough to send it to us. You know, they're in the city directory. Yes, they did indeed exist, but we have a documentation of them, and there's a wonderful photograph of one of the gentlemen in like the finest clothes and the fedora and that, and he was one of the family. This is 6th Avenue looking north. I think this is like 58th Street, I think, looking north. This would be the east side of the street. And this building is there, but it's got an all new facade on it. Unless this is a Schwartz building. If it's a Schwartz building, then it's replaced that. So, but since my purpose wasn't to speak about that building, people always ask about this building further down, that's the onion skin, but think about all these buildings. Some of them have disappeared because of fire. Some of them have disappeared because they've torn them down. Some have joined into double facades. Some were actually built as double facades, but they had 2 separate businesses in them. So commercial buildings are always interesting because you'll get some that look exactly alike, like in that section, but then you get these fancy buildings, and I love the exterior of this building. Physical details of on-site inspection. If you have a house, you have a building, this is the way to start. Estimate the period that the building was constructed. If there's no definite or definitive evidence that's found on site, judge from the style. Is it what I would call a postmodern World War II home? Is it a colonial revival home? Is it one of those like Frank Lloyd Wright style houses that we have? We have 2 of those in the community that are side by side. See if you can figure out by the style. That's the whole thing, is America doesn't have a lot of unique architecture for a long period of time, and we still do. We are taking architecture from other time periods and building things with columns that look Greek, or we have things that are Italianate, that are resembling things that are from Europe. So you can judge things from styles, because depending what your materials are, your style will help you with that. This will avoid attributing the date of an earlier building on the site to a later one that replaced it. So you have to figure that out, because I've had people who've come in to research your house and say, no, there was another building there beforehand. Note the apparent changes in the physical state of the building, such as porches added, porches enclosed, 20th century siding. Picture windows. You can see that when you rip sidings off, where there may have been bigger windows or smaller windows. I have a pet peeve for people who have older homes that have the nice arched window, and they take a rectangular Anderson window and stick it in there and think it looks good. It's definitely called remodeling in the business. My son has one of those. His living room was his garage. So you drive up to his house and there's a big blank wall where the garage door would be. So I put some windows in that. So you can notice things if you walk around with a notepad and your phone with a camera and start taking pictures, and you can start figuring out things about your home. A lot of things with some of these older homes, in particular porches, whether they were added or enclosed. I live on a sand, basically one of these sand dunes up in Racine, across the street from the lake. I only have at the most 2 inches of topsoil. And so I was digging in our poor soil, and I found footings for a front porch. Everything I've seen, we'll talk about later, but sand-borne maps, plat maps, things that, there are 2 houses that resemble mine. My porch is not supposed to have been any bigger than what it is. I've looked at photographs. No, the porch wasn't bigger. I've looked at permits. The porch isn't supposed to be bigger. but there are footings for something that are off the front of my house. So those are those things. If you find something in your yard, people find cisterns, old wells with a sewer cover on their property, sometimes right adjacent to their house. You'll find those a lot with houses from the 20s. So those bungalows we have around town, people had cisterns, something that looks like a sewer well by their house yet. So you have to look around and really start trying to figure out if there have been some physical changes in your house. The shape of the ground plan. Did your property change over time? Was it a bigger lot? And was it subdivided? Did you have a big acreage out in the county and then it was sold off over time? Materials of construction. Look in your attic. Look in your basement. I have cinder block walls in part of my house in the basement. Outside is Cream City bricks. Found out the wall was caving in. I asked previous owners, why do I have cinder block on this, on the one side, one wall, and all the rest is Cream City brick? Because Cream City brick was falling apart and they had to reinforce the wall. Go and look in your house. Sometimes people will have a beam in their house that will be boxed in, and they pull the planks off and discover they have actually have big beams in their basements. So I actually went and investigated a house when I first came to the community, and we had hewn beams still in a house, which means you can see the axe cuts where they had trimmed out the tree. Now, a tree would have come from a sawmill, but maybe they needed a different size or something. So somebody was doing something with that, but we knew there was chop marks. I know a previous director had found in those little houses on the north side, those little cottages I was talking about that are north of 50th along by St. George's or St. Elizabeth's now. Some of those houses are very, very old. Also, houses that you see a single chimney many times are the very, very old houses because they would have had a potbelly stove that would have heated the whole house. And instead of having one on both floors, they had one big central stove. And then they had what you would call grates, could have been wood, could have been metal, that the air, actually the hot air would flow up into your bedrooms on the second floor. So there's things. Did you rip a floor out? You see a weird big square in your floor? Maybe it was a register for the air to come up. So you have to look for your details in your house. Location in relation to side streets, prominent features such as railroads, churches, setback from the street, lot line, street numbers, and house numbers change. But these relationships remain more constant and will be the reference point in using in many maps. Our community, that'll work for some things, but we did widen streets with some city plans that if we get to, we'll be discussing that tonight. Information given on buildings. What's on your building? Do you know your house number for the building? Or are you out in the county and you have a rural route designation? Rural buildings are a lot harder to find history on because you didn't have a regular address. You actually went to a PO box and you picked up your mail in an adjacent community. But the advantage of having a county home or a county building is not always a lot of turnover. And sometimes buildings can stay in families for generations after generations. And then the other one is the current use or other identical buildings in the community. So you can walk in neighborhoods in Kenosha and you can see this building looks like this house, that looks like this house. Oh, we're going to skip a house. It looks like the same house 3 doors down. Oh, it looks like those houses across the street. And you'll see that in neighborhoods. So some neighborhoods have a particular house that was built in because it was part of a development or what we would call a subdivision. So look at the houses in your neighborhoods. An idea of how a neighborhood can change. This is 56th Street, where the courthouse would be now. There was an auditorium there. There's a construction site here. And what you're looking at is you're coming from over here, looking there. So all this stuff disappeared that was in that neighborhood. Across the street, what's across the street now? The Civic Square. And the Mary D. Bradford, you can see it here. So communities, this was more residential neighborhood at one time, but it changed dramatically. gives you an idea, it's before the courthouse is built, but there were houses in that neighborhood that that some people moved them out of the neighborhood. There was one in Civic Square that was known to be a confectionery or a candy maker. And it was moved to somewhere on 22nd Avenue north of 52nd Street. Now, things that people want to know about houses, they're always the people who are very quiet when they come in. And they say, I want to know about my house. I want to know what happened to my house. Those people are scared to tell me they think they've had or have had a paranormal experience. The reason I know about the confectionery house is this man says in the middle of the night, he'll hear children running up and down the halls in the middle of the night. And he thinks it's his son who's still young and gets up and his kid's asleep. So we did some research and found out that it was a confectionery shop, but we don't think was open to the public for children to come in and buy at the local candy store. So we haven't solved that mystery for them yet. Next step, start the documentary research. The following sources are suggested. No one source has all the information. Each provides clues to the history of your building. Documentation. Just maps can be a good start. These are all the kinds of maps that you can have, and there's infinitely more than what I have just there. You're not going to be looking at a global map nowadays, except if you're looking at Google. I use Google for answering things all the time for people, because I'll take an old photograph in their house and I'll compare them. I never even have to drive to the building and look anymore. So both John Martins and I use Google Map, which is global in a mapping system that we never had access to before. It makes our jobs so much easier. So we have plot maps, which would be a layout of how you want to put building on a property, street maps, neighborhood maps, town or city maps, landscape maps, township maps, county maps, watershed maps. People want to know if there was a creek going through or by the fire station that it's across the street from where the automobile plant was on 52nd Street. And they were restoring that, except their basement was always wet, always wet. They said it was like having a little trickle going through their basement. Well, I told John I thought there was some creek, just recalling looking at topographic maps a long time ago. So he's our other staff member. He started researching and looking through old maps and found, yes, there indeed was some kind of creek that went around the property and over one way. That would explain why their basement's probably wet all the time. It's not when it just rains. So there was something going on. So think of all those kinds of maps, and there's much more. What kinds of maps you should use if you're doing research for your house? This is local things that you're going to look for. Bird's eye view map, an aerial map, plat maps and surveyor notes. There are plat maps, but then there's maps that have surveyor notes attached to them. Like I said, I have a 1926. It's kind of a plat map, but it's not really a plat map. It's a big bound book that's a draftsman surveyed everything, or somebody surveyed it all out, made a draft form of it. And then there's notes connected to all these different pages of this book. United States Geographical Survey, topographic maps. That's a perfect example of trying to figure out where the creek is. The Jerome's Creek, some of the houses down on 5th Avenue can tell where it is, because if you go in their backyard, some people haven't shoveled away the creek bed yet. So there used to be a family, Ray and Mary Johnson lived down there. And if you went in their backyard, they had a little cottage on the front and a big backyard because they loved to garden. And you could actually see where Jerome Creek went right through their backyard, because it still had banks, little banks on going through their property. Sanborn Fire Insurance maps. That is the mother lode of maps to do research for houses and for buildings. GM Hopkins Company maps. I don't have any of those in the collection, but they are accessible on Library of Congress's National Archives. Wisconsin Land Economic Inventory, the Brodner surveys. I do not have one. They are available online. And what they did is during the Depression, they went into communities and did surveys, economic surveys of what's happening in communities to see if they could revitalize businesses and what they could do with buildings that had gone into foreclosure and were seen they're abandoned. So the Brodner surveys or Brodner surveys are good for that. If you are looking for a gap, I'm not sure what Kenosha has for that because I haven't accessed this, but I know what other communities have done. Madison did a lot of work with this particular kind of survey. Infrastructure maps would be things like road maps, bridges, railroads. Perfect example is the creek, which people do not know. There was a creek downtown, had at least 6 or more versions of bridges in different locations and changed along that. One of the bridges was moved further up the creek, but the creek isn't there anymore except underwater. So infrastructure maps will tell you about that. It could be bus lines, trolley lines, bridges, those things that help with the community. Other places, it could be ferry terminals and airports and things that talk about the structure that supports your community. You could have had your house moved because the public park, which would end up being Simmons Island, the houses had to go. There's only 3 houses on the island yet, but there were lots of houses on the island. We have yet to find announcements other than the city council said the buildings have to either be torn down or moved, but we have not found newspaper articles that said, oh, they're moving all these houses, come and see them, or they moved them. We have photographs and that, but we know that buildings had been moved. But try to find a record because now we have people saying, well, I heard the rumor my house came from Simmons Island. Haven't been able to prove it yet. Other kinds of maps, climate, soil, geology, vegetation, not so much when you're searching for a structure. Unless you're realizing, oh, our original property had a swamp on it. Now, if you look at southwestern Kenosha County, we have a lot of wetlands where they put drainage canals and they've filled things in and things have disappeared that were wetlands. So it would be applicable for more county things, or how streets have disappeared in the community over the time. Like Summers is struggling right now with their homes. Climate, soil, geology, and vegetation might have a lot to do with that because there's nothing holding the bluffs up. So Kenosha bird's eye map. Bird's eye maps were artist renditions of the panoramic views of cities drawn from above. This is 1882. It also has the date of 1880, 1881, 1883, because it was reprinted. And people bought them because it's a nice piece of art for people on the wall. This was even reprinted in modern times, I believe in the 70s. By I think the Historical Society, for a matter of fact. So it does give details, but you have to remember there's an artistic flair with this. And it may not be exactly as you think it is. So you have to realize there could be, creativity involved with it. So as I said, creative embellishments that communicate an extraordinarily rich account of the landscape at the time when the maps were created. Remember, though, these were drawings frequently portrayed at its exaggerated prosperity. These images were popular about 1860, it is 60, until aerial photography rendered them obsolete by the 1920s. So lots of communities all over the country had these, and you can still get reprints of these. A lot of companies have reworked the plates from, and you can get prints of these. So they're really a wonderful resource. And if you start looking at things, you can see that there's lots of residential houses in here. Let's see. We can go on here. You see all the houses. And if you get up here, this is where more of the businesses are. So up It's better. Oh, lovely, Cindy. Sorry about that. So you can see that there's a big white structure. That was a flower storage building. The big white one over here was too. On the north side of the river is the tannery. But right next to the tannery, and I'm actually going to go up here, or you in here, this here is the water cure. This is all the tannery. So the water cure is here. And the tannery is there, but on the south side, we have Bain Wagon. So really, industry is located along the river. And the thing for the community to know is, not everybody has indoor plumbing at this time. Our community is dependent on what you call artesian wells. They can get contaminated. We didn't have the water department yet. And so in spite of having all this building, think about it, they're not getting water that is being treated from the lake. So you're dependent on, do you have a well? Is your well clean? We don't have people going and doing water testing like they do required for wells now. So if you look historically, what's happening to communities, we have people getting cholera, and we have people getting typhus, and they're getting diseases that are related to their quality of their water. So you could be researching a family in their home and they may not exist anymore because they had gotten ill. Or when the community starts getting gas piped into their homes. Somebody was doing research on a house and we found a newspaper article that the resident and man had died because he had thought he turned his gas off. Just like if you had a stove, but they're on the lamps, like in the old movies. And what he did is he didn't turn it off all the way and he died of inhaling, gas and basically asphyxiated himself. And they found him later. And so think of how a building and your infrastructure of gas and electric and water, and now, well, it was telephones and our public buses and all that can affect where people live. At one time, people walked to work, people took the train to work, people took the electric line, people came from Waukegan up on the train, people came from Racine down on the train. And so our community was built around, a great deal of our community was built around our train system. Later, we end up having, a bus system. The question is now how many people actually take a bus to go to their job? Or how many people used to live in the neighborhood and walk to their job? I have a question, Bob. You did an oral history recently with us. How did you get to work? How did you get to work? When you first started at Pierce with your father, how did you get to work?
Drove a car.
You drove a car? Did you drive your own car?
Yes.
Yes. So did you have guys who worked there who lived in the neighborhood?
Absolutely.
And did they walk in for work then?
Several, I'd say at least a half dozen within a block or so of the plant.
And did they go home for lunch?
Yes.
Okay, so the thing is the dynamics of communities, where they live will have choices to do with where your children go to school, where you go to church, where you work. And so all those things are interconnected with your house. People just think bricks, windows and that, but the dynamics of when you're researching your house, they're all tied together. People lived in particular neighborhoods, and people till this day, where there's in Kenosha, there's South Siders, there's North Siders. There's the people who lived in the St. George's neighborhood and people who lived in St. Casimir's neighborhood, or people who lived in St. James neighborhood or St. Matthew's neighborhood. So communities were also part of whether they belonged to a particular church in town. We had 2 synagogues in town at one time, and our older one, which is Interesting architecturally, because there was a man who invented a special concrete forming brick patent. And that synagogue, the Benade one, is because of that technology for bricks. So researching a house and a building are way beyond just your bricks and your blueprint or where your kitchen is. All those things are all interconnected together. If you look here, this lower corner here is actually Central Park. Now, have you heard of Central Park? Some people are saying. Or it was called the Commons. It was also called the City Park. If you look at it, it's all residential around it. There is a couple churches in the neighborhood. One is the Congregational Church. Then St. Matthew's is in the neighborhood. There's also a Catholic church in the neighborhood too. I don't know what the name of that particular Catholic church is, and it's not St. James. It's the church that was near Kenosha News. There's a church, a red brick church near there.
That would be a Baptist church.
It's a Baptist, it was a Baptist church, but at one time at this map, it's marked as a Catholic church. We'll see. I think I have the identifier here. It might say, this empty space is Library Park. At one time, it was the public commons. So people lived in that neighborhood early, all the way back to the Durkee family because they owned part of it. But also it used to be fenced in with gates because you would take your horse or any other livestock you have, and they would go eat the grass in the village green or the commons. And that by 1871, the ladies of the community were complaining about that. And then before 1910, around 1910, what time, anybody know the exact date for Simmons Library?
1900.
Mr. Simmons died in 1910, so it was for his son. And I don't think he was alive. I don't know if he was alive for the dedication, but think about that. That was a common public space for at least 60 plus years. But it started getting running down, and a group of ladies who started a park association didn't like the fact that people were still taking their cows there to go eat grass, and it was getting run down and shabby and that. But it just gives you an idea how much a neighborhood is affected by things. So this is a close-up of Central Park. Now you can see much more details. So we have St. Matthew's, the Congregational Church, and then see the church up on top, John?
Yeah, that's Congregational.
Yeah, Congregational's here, and then there's one up here.
That was Old Baptist Church.
Yeah.
I remember.
So it gives you an idea how many houses are in what we would consider their downtown business neighborhood. How do you find out about them? This might be the only record of those houses. People just didn't go and take photographs outside of their houses unless they were incredibly wealthy families. Or you had those porch pictures or those whole family gatherings where they all go across the front. I actually have a lovely one of those from my husband's family where there's like 4 rows of people, elderly people on the chairs, the people standing behind them, the people standing on the chairs behind them, and then people on the porch behind them. So this may be the only record, and remember, this is an artist's rendition of what they think the community looks like at the time. But I think they're going to be kind of pretty honest if it's a 2-story building, if it's a 1-story building, what the architectural detail is. Because if you look at the Congregational Church, it's pretty accurate considering it's the artist's version. And the old St. Matthew's and the Baptist Church really doesn't look that much different. They have some beautiful window, or had some beautiful windows in that church. Now this is part of the identifier for that neighborhood. So we have the Episcopal Church, the Baptist Church, Methodist Church, Unitarian Church, Catholic Church, Lutheran Church, the German Catholic Church, the Danish Lutheran Church. Courthouse was in that picture, Bain Wagon Works, the US Express, which is kind of like, well, now we'd say like the post office or UPS, they did packages. They also did telegraphs. Coal Yard, post office. Kenosha Water Cure, which I pointed out before. Munzenberger Brewery is actually way north in the big picture. The Grant House, which was a hotel. There's a bakery, Steam Bakery, the Pettit Malt House, a match factory, which was, I found out was illegal. They weren't supposed to have it because they're highly dangerous. So this is a better close-up of what I was talking about earlier. There were multiple bridges over the river. So think of all those residential houses that are on the north side of the river and there's still residential houses right next to these big factories. Question is, do those houses have photographs? Do those houses have records? And these are the other businesses that were there. The Nelson and Hanson Undertaking, which we all know, which was in Library Park. At this time, I'm not sure if they're in Library Park, though. They may be another building. Whitaker Engine and Skane, Planing Mill and Sash Door Blind Factory, which ends up being a really big company, actually. Wagon and Carriage Factory, Nicholas Persh. And if we go back on here, Nicholas Persh's factory or shop. This is for you in here. It's right over here, number 15. That is where Peter Persh was. So for you to have an idea. Yeah. And the Kenosha Water Cure next to the Tannery Company. They moved to where, of course, the Bandshell Penoyer Park was, because you really don't want to have people come and take the water next to the tannery. So we have the post office, grocery stores, the Calkins, Simmons Hall, the bankers, Gottfredson. Gottfredson is around in this. So they're, I think, the longest running business in the community. Lumber dealers, lots and lots of lumber dealers in this community. Very, very dangerous. Some other things from this is this big empty space is where the brass companies end up being. Over here, on here. So it was actually called Seminary Park at one time. We haven't found out why yet. We don't know of a seminary being there, so why is it called Seminary Park? And then the image on the left is actually Simmons Island. You can see actually the lighthouse there and see the variety of houses that are around in 1882. So there were houses there. And the one building with the dock is, I think, their version of the Coast Guard, but I'm not sure. That bridge was in two different spots too. So the current bridge we have coming out to the island is not the bridge they had at one time. It went at a greater angle. It went really kind of through where Marina Gardens is now. Different angle, further south. This is a little hard to read, of course, but this gives you an idea. This is a really early one from 1857. This was done by Army Corps of Engineers. It's how the harbor is and the river, and I guess what we call the small boat harbor, when we actually had an island there. But the reason I put this is there's always notes connected to these surveyor pieces, these surveyor maps. If anybody wants to see this, I think when we open up at the lighthouse station again, this will be available. It's in our flip maps there. Plat books. Plat books that we know are published, and I don't have them all, but I do have a good selection. Plat books are available at the Library of Congress, National Archives. And they're big bound books with lots of maps in them with colors like pink and green and yellow, really horrible colors actually for the time. But these are the ones that we know have been published. There's been a variety of publishers in that, but I can tell you that we have the 73, I think we have the 99, we have the 1908, and I think we have actually a version that is labeled 25, but it's probably a 24. But these are all accessible online now. There's multiple sources for them. Some of them are available through the State Historical Society, but I know they are available at with the Library of Congress. So that's quite a few, and you can really see how a community changes over time by looking at these. Now, this is a plat map that I have from 1936. So think of it, we're in the depth of the Depression. They're trying to figure out what they are doing. It's not the traditional plat map that you see in the bound books. The greenish light yellow color are parks in the community, and the yellow is what they consider the business district. So think about how they're looking at the business district beyond the river, because there are small little retail businesses that went up 7th Avenue, and then it doesn't reach really far down beyond really Library Park. And the purple is potential park is what they were thinking of. But by 1936, the names have changed. And we'll talk about that a little later. Plat maps I was saying they were using these weird colors. There's like minty green, there's like army green, yellow. And what they are is it's to make a distinction with features that are on your maps. So this is a map that is, remember I talked about Bonds Estate? This is Bonds, like Bonds Woods, Lincoln Park area before it's ever developed. So if you wanted to research a house or a building, what you get an idea is you have these names on city plat maps. They're not always with names on, because you'll see there's these blocks that haven't been sold off or developed yet with owners on them. And so it gives you an idea of what you need to look for. If you're going to look for a particular family that's on here, you go to the plat map and see if the family name is where the people say it was or where they live. The thing is lots of people get stories, but they're not always right. There may be some truth in stories, but a lot of times people's memories, it's like when we talk about those telephone games where you say something and someone's there and you pass it on, you pass it on and pass it on. Stories aren't always right. So you have to really go and look for documentation of your home, of your family history. Sanborn maps, that is the best resource to know what a building looked like. Not really a photographic image of what a building looked like, but what it was is it's the best detailed resource for historical research in cities. They made them for cities. They didn't make them for rural areas. And the maps were created by the Sanborn Map Company and sold to insurance underwriters. So Sanborn maps are meant to figure out if your house or your building or your business is at risk of burning down. So they are looking for brick, they're looking for cement, they're looking for block, they're looking for iron. They're also looking for a match factory next to your house, a lumber yard next to your house, the spontaneous coal combustion, coal company next to your house. They're looking for those potential things that could contribute to your house burning down, but they're also looking, do you have fire departments? Do you have water towers in your business in case your business has a fire? Do you have fire hydrants? Do you have a volunteer fire department? Do you have an active fire department? So think of all the things that people forget. Will your house be taken care of if you don't have a fire hydrant near in your block? Or are you out in the county, further out of the city being developed and it hasn't been built yet? How am I doing for time, Sandra?
You're at 7:08 right now.
Oh, God, I'm over time. I apologize. I have a tendency to do this, folks. Sanborn Company made them for many cities, and they made them from 1867 to 1950. What they're doing is they're showing you streets, neighborhoods, towns, cities, urban areas. You're going to see transportation, factories, churches. It's a wonderful asset. It's one of our favorite maps to get to work with. And what it does, it tells you key things specifically about your neighborhood. It will tell you ceiling height, will tell you the number of stories. It will tell you the height will tell you if you have porches. It will tell you if you have outer buildings. These Sanborn maps for Kenosha are available for all those years. We have one big map. And what they did is they pasted it on top of the older map and pasted it on top of it as things change and glued over it. So it's wonderful because now you have access to these online, except the 1950 is pasted over kind of like ours, except mine goes a little further than 1950. Get an idea what a Sanborn map looks like. It'll show you districts. This is usually a front page. So this is early Kenosha, I mean 1886 where we were talking before. Not much further beyond the artist rendering of the community, only 4 years. And this is what it looks like by 1918. It's grown that much. The neat thing about Sanborn maps is they have keys. And when you look at the key, it will tell you what the building is made out of. So blue is stone buildings, grayish is fireproof buildings. So it could be a fireproof building for people store pianos in fireproof buildings. Those are those warehouses that are concrete buildings. You'll see that they're going to tell you if a building is tile, if it's a brick building. It'll tell you if it has frames. It will tell you if it's a dwelling. If there's a D on your map, it's a dwelling. Yellow is usually wood houses. Sometimes you'll see, like now, a lot of houses have wood frames and then a brick veneer on them, but they're not really what's holding up the building. They're aesthetic, so they'll have the combinations in a modern map with that. You'll know about if you have an open elevator, which means you have a freight elevator in a business and it doesn't have gates across it. This is, before they had always building codes about things. It'll tell you if you have brick chimneys. It'll tell you if you have iron chimneys. Cool map. Go online, go look at some Sanborn maps. This will give you an idea. Let's see where I want to look. Here, Bob. Pierce's Wagon Shop. This is when it's downtown. That's all the bigger it was at that time, is that pink, this pink area right around here. You have painting in the beige building north of it, and I'm assuming maybe these outer buildings are storage. All I know is at one time there is so much wood in lumber yards in Kenosha. I can see why they had gigantic fires a couple times. So give you an idea is it'll say if you have it yellow, it's a frame building. If it's pink, it's a brick building. It will tell you if a building is, how wide it is. It'll give you an address on it. So along the street, there's street numbers. These street numbers have changed in modern times in the 20s, 25 to 27. So that's going to be different. We have, like Pierce, you have, this is in Pierce, but there's a shed over here. There's a drugstore. Let's see if I can get back out and get up here. Oops. I'm sorry. We should have Xander doing this, Xander. So you can see we have we do have residential buildings in these neighborhoods, and you can see that they're made up with different things. We have that grayish green, which means it has cement or concrete included with it. So these are the maps that are going to tell us about the community. If we see this, a photo which you've seen before, but if we go up here, oops, am I getting that? Upper corner up here is the courthouse, or is that City Hall? That is the courthouse with a public park across it. So by the time this map is made, this has been cleared out for a public park. So tell people that if they had a home here at one time and the home disappears, it's going to give them a time period for when it disappears. The kind of coppery yellowish color is when they're using stone for the buildings, masonry for the buildings, not brick. This is a sample map of the neighborhood by Library Park. This shows you all the different homes that are there. And in this location, the Deming House is in its original location yet before it had been moved. So for people who are into that history, you'll understand that. City directories. City directories are useful because you try to find out where your family is. They're alphabetical, but they only list head of household. So if you become a widow, you may not show up in city directory for a period of years. We have city directories from 1861 to 2007. I know the library's given us more. So we have some beyond that, but I don't know exactly yet because we're in the midst of an inventory. We do have miscellaneous years from 1861 to 1899. We definitely don't have 30 years worth of city directories though. Once we get to 1901, we have alternate odd years. So we have, 01, 03, 05. It'll be very frustrating for when you're looking in between those dates, but they were not published. They do not exist. Then from 1950 to 1958, we have the even years then. And then from 1959 to 2007, we have all of them. And we do have now more that are coming in or have come into the collection that will be added to that to the more present times. The thing is when will city directory stop being a paper document and become a digital document? And is it going to be saved? That as an archivist and for people who are going to be doing research in the future, will those records be saved? Will they even generate those records? Are companies going to go out and make a digital city directory? City directories list people, businesses, have advertising in it. The beginnings will tell you your government, parks, schools, and such. So city directories are like those Sanborn maps, infinite amount of information. 1927 directory is another mother lode in our collection. It tells you what the old street names were pre-2527 to what the new street names are. So if you look at this, it'll tell you that, well, I'll just use one. 60th was originally Prairie Avenue. 6th Avenue was Main Street. Sherry Road on the north side was Caledonia. Names changed. The names that haven't changed is Washington Road, Roosevelt Road, and a couple of the odd little ones here and there. But we do have 6th Avenue A and 6th Avenue B downtown, which is where that little triangle goes down towards the library. One's an A, one's a B. The numbers change. So the only way if you're doing building research to get the right building from one time to the other is to look at the 27 directory, and it is available online, and get your old number and make it a new number, or take your new number because you live in a house now and you have the new number. You don't have any clue what the old number may have been, is to transcribe it to the old number. Some streets disappeared. Some streets were actually alleys. So when they did the 1925 plan, streets were widened, houses were moved. 22nd Avenue widen up, where we had the riots in the summer, those streets were narrower. Buildings were removed and moved somewhere else or torn down, and that street became wider. So communities, as they grow, in particular, this community becoming an industrial community, your house might have just disappeared. You go further back, it may have been somewhere else and had been moved. Or you're doing family genealogy, your house doesn't exist anymore because industry bought it and moved it. We'll find a lot of things as Jeffrey expanded and Jockey expanded, things that were homes weren't homes any longer. So the thing is you have to make sure you get those notepads or get your computer out and you document everything that you find. People will come and they'll find information with us and they won't write down the file they found it in, or the book they found it in, or the map they found it in. And then we will get emails from people and they'll say, well, I have this, but I don't know where I found it. I said, do you know if it was with us or whether it was somebody else? I don't know. So if you do any of this documentation of your house, your building, write down your source and your place that you found it. Is the infinitely most important thing is to be organized so you can find this stuff. Significant, what's significant, Kenosha and Kenosha County be 25 and 26, those roads changed. The numbers used to be low at the river downtown and got high as you went to north and south, low by the lake and got high as you went out to Walworth County. When it changed, the numbering system was low on the north side of the county and got high as you went south, which makes sense because that's how our streets and avenues go now, right? They're lower streets north and they're higher number streets south. It still changed when it went from the lake west though. They still changed, the numbers did change. So be aware of it. People say, oh, well, it only happened from north to south. No, it happened all over the county and it was throughout the whole county. What's going to start making it goofy for people is now we got subdivisions with names and streets that have personal names and pretty names and that. And we don't have avenues and places and streets. This community is going to have to learn where they are now, or they'll have to get their Google map out and find out where they're going. But it's really curious because it's a wonderful community because it was set up on a grid system and then it was renumbered with an even better grid system. City plan, there's a published city plan. There's been reprints of city plans. If you go through the city plans, there's lots of little photographs of all things all over the community. Street setbacks, corners, buildings that get eliminated, businesses that get eliminated, alleyways that disappear. It's really, really, really lots and lots and lots of detail. However, there's information in it. And people don't always want to read through and look at the maps that are, oh, here are the parks, here are the schools, here are the transit lines, here are what we want to do for widening streets and that. But if you start reading through things and looking at photographs, you might find your building is in that photograph or your neighborhood is in that photograph for your house. And Patty, are these still available in Southwest Library for access, the city plans? Okay, great. Xander's shaking his head yes. So you're able to get them. We have them. They have been reprinted. They are, I have seen them for sale on eBay. So they are out there. Photographic collections, sometimes you're lucky enough to have a picture of your building. This is that Justin Weed house again. It's an old picture. It's a more contemporary picture. We know Justin Weed, poor man, had this house built. He died before he got to live in it and went to somebody else. And it didn't stay in the family. It went to somebody else, built in 1848. It's a unique building, one, because it's a cobblestone building. So it's mortar and little stones are put in it. And it's unique to this community as in it's the only one that we know of. The only place I have seen this is in Rock County. There are some buildings that have cobblestones like this. And some of the houses in Pendarvis, the neighborhood down there, they have some of those. So it's a unique architectural style, but it is what you would call a Greek revival style building though, but it isn't a framed one. It's a cobblestone one. So sometimes your buildings will be unique building. Iserman building. Everybody thinks it's a Frank Lloyd Wright building. It's Frank Lloyd Wright style, but it's not a Frank Lloyd Wright building. And the thing that's confusing about it is there are two of them right next to each other. And the Iserman brothers of Iserman Brothers store, department store, built them. They like the style of architecture. So there's a big long detail on Anthony's home. I think this is Anthony and Jane, or Frank and Jane. And then Anthony and his wife lived next door. Same sort of style house, but slightly different in plans. Same architect, same builder, brothers living next to each other for that style house. It makes one of those very, very unique houses. But we also have a house on 75th Street. That's a metal house. It's all metal panels that have been put together. Can't nail anything into a wall because it has metal walls. People bought Sears and Roebuck plans. You could order a whole house. It would get delivered by a train flat bed here. You'd have to go then pick up your house at the train station. So a lot of houses were done that way because it was affordable. If you had good carpentry skills or had family members that had good carpentry skills. We know we have Sears and Roebuck's houses in our community. Place that has records, tax assessor's office, register of deeds. It is because of COVID, people have not been able to have access to it. They're asking people to do email requests for records. But the kinds of things that tax assessors have are these kinds of records. So tax rolls, they will tell you the current owner, they'll tell you the size of the lot, it will tell you past owners. That is if they've kept the records, and they're required to by state law in our state. But sometimes records are missing. I'm not saying Kenosha, but sometimes records will be missing from tax assessor's office. It will tell what it's permitted to be used for a building. So whether it can be a residence, whether it can be a shop in a residence. Those are all things that are supposed to be permitted. It'll tell you materials of your building. Sometimes there'll be photographs in files for buildings. It'll tell you the assessed value of a home. We always want to argue that because we don't want to pay more taxes. Asian buildings is estimated by the assessor. So that's that specialist. When I said specialists who go and look at buildings, that is the assessor is the one who is seeing buildings all the time and will be able to at least get an age range of a home. We also have things if it's an apartment building or something that's been broken into apartments, like some of the bigger mansions were broken into apartments or flats. Those kinds of records will be in the building. And then the thing that's the most really important for the tax assessor's office is your tax account number. So other things in the community get your information from. Your neighbors. If you have older people who live in your neighborhood, ask them what they know about your house. If the previous owners are still alive, boy, find out what you can about them before you close on that house or after you close on the house. I found a lot about because my house was paid for by the previous owners. They had the abstract. I want to see the abstract. I actually wanted the abstract. They wouldn't give me the abstract. Abstract is the piece of paper that is from the first purchase of land to the present day. They don't keep those anymore. They don't keep those records. They used to be stored by a company that kept abstracts for you. So a lot of those records have disappeared, have been destroyed, have been dumped. Preservation landmark groups. Many times communities have preservation groups. We have one. There'll be state preservation historic buildings lists that you can get out for registers. Thing is about that, if you do that or you find your house is on the register, that's how you can find out about Justin Weed. Besides, we know his house is on the register. The Nash house is on the register. The Iserman houses are on the register. Kenosha only has, I think, only about 600 buildings in their whole county that are on the register. So not a lot of buildings compared to some counties. So preservation groups are great. There's a national register for buildings too. And then, oops, we have a double C. And ancestry is where you can also look to find out about people because other families have posted their trees. Sometimes they have a photo of their house. Sometimes they have pictures of people inside the house. like Christmas and everybody's sitting on the sofa next to the tree. You can kind of see the interior of houses. There aren't as many interior photographs as people think. And there's a lot of reasons why. It was affordability, the Depression. A lot of people, if they're like my mother, she couldn't ever take a photograph. So we always had lots of thumbs and fingers in our photographs growing up. It could be that during the war, film wasn't accessible. And so really modern photography of more pictures of houses really started after World War II. Now we can't say that. The digital age is making that we have photographs of probably everything. The thing is how many people edit and delete the things out of their photographs, out of their phones, or out of the cloud too. So resources. Public Library has resources that'll help you. National Archives has resources for you, which is Library of Congress is considered National Archives. County, Kenosha County Register of Deeds, Wisconsin State Historical Society, but also they are the archives at UW Parkside, which is specifically an archives that's State Historical Society of Wisconsin's collections, and then the Historical Society, who I'm representing tonight. So I'm done. I'm over by half an hour. I apologize. And I thought I had too little.